So, thank you. So the very first question that we received was, hi, I would love to hear the 5 remembrances in order and slow enough to write them down, plus brief discussion. Thank you. So I would not worry about writing them down. We can certainly send them with the materials after the retreat. But David, why don't you go ahead and address that?
Sure. Well, it might not be precisely in order, but and I'm going to. There are a number of translations for this. I'll use the Thich Nhat Hanh translation, which I like, but translations are kind of a matter of taste. I'm of a nature to grow old. I cannot avoid old age. I'm of a nature to become sick. I cannot avoid illness. I'm of a nature to die. I cannot avoid my own death. Now I'm blinking a little bit, but it's the gist of it is all that is dear to me is of a nature to change. I cannot avoid the change in all that is dear to me. And the 5th, as I mentioned before, is my actions are the ground on which I stand. They are my only true possession. And Jen, maybe you remember I actually like the translation from, I think it was Stanisero for the 5th better. Do you happen to remember that?
For the 5th one?
Yeah.
I am the owner of my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, abides supported by my actions. Whatever actions I may do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir.
And this is just such a powerful teaching on self, on non-self, on impermanence and uncertainty and karma. And definitely one that I keep going back to a lot.
And as David says, there are different translations. You could hear the difference in the 5th one that we just shared. So we'd be happy to send those with the materials afterwards, send both translations. And there's also it's a chant. In my tradition, we do it as a chant. And I can send a little audio file of the chant, which is lovely too.
Carol bowing in. May I add a different 4th that I find very meaningful and that connects up with the 5th? When I die, I will leave behind all those I love and all that I cherish. And then the 5th comes in, all that I will leave behind is the impact of my deeds. Upon those acts I will stand.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. So I'll take 2 written ones, and then I see there's a couple of hands. We'll go to the hands after these 2 written ones. I have been told that the Vipassana tradition does not teach, study, or recite the Heart Sutra. Could you please talk about this? Thank you. Sure, I'm happy to talk about that because so the tradition I'm in is I call Theravada. Vipassana is a kind of practice, but it's not a tradition in my view. Some people call it that, but I don't. It's Theravada tradition. So the Buddhism is practiced in Southeast Asia primarily. And it's true, we do not teach, study, or recite the Heart Sutra, although certainly people, look at it because we're interested in Buddhism in general, but within our tradition, we don't teach, study, or recite it. And the reason for that is really important to understand, I think, that I didn't understand for years and years, which is that Theravada and Mahayana do not have identical canon, identical scripture. So math wasn't ever my strong point, but the most useful thing I ever learned in math was Venn diagrams. Remember Venn diagrams where there's circles and there's that little area in the middle? That's how the scriptures or the canon of Theravada and canon of Mahayana relate. So there are some suttas, Theravada, we call them suttas, not sutras. There are some in the middle that are quite similar, but there are many on either sides that are not identical in any way. And so the Heart Sutra is a Mahayana sutra. It is a teaching that the Mahayana talk about having been relayed to teachers after the time of the Buddha, and it's part of their tradition. It is not part of the Vipassana tradition or Theravada tradition, and that's why we don't recite it or study it. It's like saying, what that in Islam you don't study the New Testament because they're different scriptural traditions. So certainly all of the traditions, whether Mahayana or Theravada or Vajrayana, they're all based upon the fundamental teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So they share an enormous amount in common, but some of the specific teachings are not identical. Hopefully that answers it. Anybody, Stephen or David, anything you want to add? Okay, good question, because it confuses people, I think, when you first hear that. Let's see, Bharat, I think you had your hand up first. If you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think that must have been by mistake. So,
Oh, okay. Okay. If you go to reactions, you can remove it. Thank you. So Danny, I think you're next then.
Hi, and thank you for the retreat. I have two questions, and you can choose not to answer them now, or maybe you'll come up later in the in the retreat. But one is around delusion, and it seems that there's some practices to kind of address craving and aversion, like fasting or abstaining from sex or loving kindness meditation, like specific actions other than just seeing craving and aversion. Like, what specific actions are there to address delusion other than just learning the Dharma? What are there specific things we can do to actually get beyond delusion so that craving and aversion don't have such fertile soil to take hold? That's one question. The other question is around the practice of Qigong. Usually I follow my hands with my eyes open. And I noticed when you were teaching today, Stephen, you kind of had your eyes closed. It appeared on the screen to me. I'm not sure. I'm just wondering if there's any reason to do one or the other.
Stephen, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Danny, for the questions. When I'm doing Qigong, my eyes are usually cast down, not usually closed, except sometimes for sitting. If you close your eyes when you're standing and moving, or at least if you're me, you're going to fall over. So it may look like that, but that's not what it is. The idea is that we have a lot of nerve endings in our hands, and we pay attention to our hands a huge amount. We're very, very aware of what our hands are doing at any given time, and we're very visual animals. Most of our sensory input, or at least a lot of it, comes through the eyes. So we have a lot, what the Taoists would say, we have a lot of consciousness in the hands and in the eyes, in our sight. So if in Qigong, if we want to place our energy or place our intention, our awareness somewhere, using the eyes and using the hands are very good vehicles for doing that. So eyes closed, eyes open. As long as the eyes are in harmony with the hands, there's going to be a lot more attention directed to that movement or to that place in the body or to that posture. So generally in standing, keep your eyes at least partly open, please. And in sitting, of course, that's your option. But I hope that sheds some light on that. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but I usually, with my eyes open, kind of like follow the movement of the hand. And I think you explained that maybe it just makes a lot more attention and presence in that movement of the hand. Versus like
Yeah.
when my eyes were like downcast today, I felt like maybe the chi, or I felt more of the body wherever I directed my eyes.
Well,
I
yeah,
didn't have
it's
one
a
control.
it's a sliding scale. I mean, if you're not looking at your hands, then feel them. You know, our attention goes to our feeling as well as our seeing. So, and some moves will actually watch our hands. If our hands are out to the side, we're moving, our eyes aren't going to be able to watch them. You know, so then we feel, and then the eyes are focused internally. And there's a whole series of practices, a whole level of Qigong where the eyes are actually looking inside the body. But that's another story. Okay, thank you.
And then his other question was about delusion. He said, what specific actions are there to address delusion so craving doesn't take hold? Hopefully I got that right, Danny. Two of you want to start with that?
Sure. I think that kind of awareness can surface during meditative practice. Often it surfaces from other people, for better and worse. But I think the insight practice. You may know that in rough terms, practice can be divided into shamatha, which is the sitting on the breath, the concentrative part of our practice, and insight, in which we begin to practice or develop the skills to work with what arises in our minds. And you know, there's a lot to say about insight practice. Takes a light touch, and you can't expect results, and on and on and on. So those are two things that spring to mind. You know, just sitting on the breath, observing kindly what's going on in your mind. Thich Nhat Hanh urges his students to ask a wonderful question, just a wonderful question. Are you sure? So when things come up in your mind, or if you become reactive about something, or if you think something might be delusion, it's always wonderful to ask the question, am I sure? So those are just right off the top a few ways to approach it, but to really work skillfully with what comes up for you, even stuff that you haven't questioned before, because that's what delusions are. They wouldn't be delusions if you knew they were delusions, right? Are you sure? And to be calm, we all have delusions. That's part of the deal here. So be kind to yourself when one becomes apparent to you. And I think we could all talk at length, but I'll stop now. I don't know, Jan, you want to add something?
But I just, remind you that delusion means ignorance. Delusion and ignorance are synonyms. So to address ignorance, you need to know. And so the specific actions aren't what's important. It's their actions that help us see clearly. So it's not that the actions fix the delusion. It's the knowing that lets us fix the delusion, but there may be some actions that support seeing more clearly. So meditation certainly is one of those. I think you mentioned some renunciant practices. So those sorts of practices, letting go of things, help us recognize where our habit patterns are. So that's how we know. It's not that the letting go is the wisdom, it's that in letting go in that way, or in seeing our habit patterns, that gives us knowledge of where we're stuck, where our craving is. So I guess the way to address delusion is through knowing, because it's ignorance. The way to learn is by educating. And then there are actions that help us learn, but it's the actual overcoming of the ignorance that ends the craving, not the activity per se. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great, Jan. I agree with that. And there are 4 vows in Zen, and one of them is delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. And so it's just what Jan said, it's transforming the delusions through learning, through knowing. And one way to do that, just based on David's talk about non-self, one way to experience non-self is to take the view of the other. You have a view, and then your view is right, and my view is wrong, and just pause for a moment, and take the view of the other, and that will give you maybe a little bit of a balance in trying to suss out the truth. So
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So let's go to one more received question. I have to move my screen, I'm sorry. So we practice coming back to our breath. What about those times when an answer comes to a question? And when it does, it can become a Dhamma talk. Do we race back to our breath? Either of you want to jump on that?
I have to say, I'm not sure what they mean when an answer can become a Dhamma talk. So maybe if the person would like to fill that out a little bit more, or Stephen.
I think I can answer. It depends, I would say, what kind of meditation you're doing. If you're doing Shikantaza, which is just basically meditating on formlessness, and allowing everything that arises to pass away, and just be the mountain that's just there, and that the weather blows around all the time. No matter how brilliant the insight is, you let it blow away. That's the practice. Not attaching to it, because this is the Zen practice of awakening, that it will not appear as form. And even the greatest insight in the world is a mental formation. So if that's the kind of meditation one's practicing, that would be the appropriate response. I think, on the other hand, if we're doing some kind of investigative practice, if we have a question that we're contemplating, if we have something that's deep in our heart that we're looking to get some clarity on, and an answer arises, that's wonderful. I think you're blessed. Go with that. If that's a Dharma talk, then listen to it. Be the one listening to the talk. We don't always have to be the voice in our head. We could be the one listening to it, and that's just fine. So I've had that experience often, and like I said, it depends what your intention is for that particular sitting practice.
Great, thank you. I think let's keep going so that we get to more. Megan, you have your hand up.
Thank you all for facilitating this retreat. It's just, I'm feeling so grateful to be gathering together, and it's just really lovely to see you all. My question is related to your talk, David. You mentioned, I appreciated this because this is something that I've grappled with, is having a well-established self before non-self can arise. And you mentioned examples of people who didn't have a well-established self kind of jumping whole hog onto the non-self train, and that being problematic. And so I was interested to hear more about how it can be problematic to not have a well-established self, and how that well-established self supports non-self.
Thanks, Megan. Good question. I'll start out, and perhaps Jan and Stephen will have things to add. But and this is true in a number of traditions, where in some way, shape, or form people think that the way to enlightenment or heaven, or wherever people think they want to go, is to obliterate the self. Perhaps in religion, some people think that I'm nothing. I'm turning it all over to God. I have known people who just thought that self was evil, and certainly it was wrong. I'm thinking of one person in particular who was a Hindu practitioner. And we have to live in both worlds. And it's the balance, the art of this practice, to live in both worlds. And by both worlds, I mean the world of self and the world of non-self, or the world of interbeing, the world of interconnection. And and perhaps we could say, well, at some point in our development, we'll be arhants, and we won't need a self. But I think until we get there, it's generally recognized that we do have a self, with our ego, with our mind, with our desires and our passions and our personality, to summarize all of those things. So, and to eliminate that is, leaves us, without an anchor in a really roiling sea. And so I think we need to, another way of putting the journey to non-self is that we're changing the emphasis in our relationship to self. We stop increasingly putting ourselves at the center of the universe. We get out of our own way. We stop believing everything we think and feel. That is a few aspects of the journey toward non-self. But to just let go of, I'm Dave, Jan is Jan, Stephen is Stephen, I think is dangerous, as I mentioned in my talk. I think that we just aren't wired to go there. We're wired from the ground up to be enveloped in self, and this practice is about lessening the grip of self on how we move through the world, and that happens over time, and it happens piece by piece. So I don't know if that answers your question, Megan, but I don't know, Jan, I know Jan will have some wonderful things to add.
Let me give Stephen a chance first, because I've already answered a couple of questions.
Okay.
There's something called spiritual bypass. And I think this is really pretty clear with Black Lives Matter. One of the right-wing reactions to Black Lives Matter is all lives matter. Well, all lives do matter, but we can't just jump there. The yard sign that I like the best about this is all lives won't matter until Black lives matter, because Black lives are the ones that haven't mattered. And so, to put it right to the universal, well, all lives matter, everyone's equal, we're all just little rolled oats in this massive pot of oatmeal. It doesn't, that's not it. We have to be aware of our differences and not just gloss them over and remove everybody's individuality. Awakening happens individually. Awakening is an individualized expression of the ultimate, of ultimate reality. It only occurs to a human being in a body on this planet who is separate. Otherwise, it's just a mass of sameness. So yeah, this is a deep question, and I think just going back to what David said in his talk, it's a paradox. You know, we have to be embroiled in suffering in order to awaken. We have to have pain in order to develop compassion. These things co-arise. And so without separateness, there couldn't be interbeing. It would just be mush. So these things rely on each other, and it's a great question, and I think I'll pass it over to my sister Jan to put the finishing touches on this ice cream sundae.
Yeah, I don't know that I can finish touches, but I can. I guess I am not a psychologist or a counselor or trained in any of that. So I'm not even sure what a well-established self is. I don't know what that means. But I do feel like makes sense to me are these teachings that David shared and from the Buddha that remind us that when we try to find some continuous, permanent, unchanging meanness, it's just not there. That who I am in this moment is different. You know, when I'm with all of you on Zoom is different than when I'm with my 6-month-old grandson. And who I am in this moment is certainly very different than who I was in 3rd grade. But I don't mean only just these huge age range differences. I mean, those are pretty dramatic, but just, you know, moment to moment, day to day, there isn't anything that I can say, well, this is what's the core. This is really the essence. And that the pain of so much of our suffering is when we think there is, that we think, well, who and what I am is a greedy, mean person, or who and what I am is somebody who can't do X, Y, Z. And then we cling to that and it causes us enormous suffering. And it's always delusional because it's not true. Even though maybe sometimes we're greedy, I guarantee you there are times when you are generous and open-hearted, that nobody is always the same. And that this sense of self that we get stuck in fools us into thinking we are always this some person that we've identified in our mind. And that causes us suffering. And the other problem with that is we do that with other people too. That, you know, we think we know who and what other people are and that they are always like whatever. And then we relate to them in that way and we never see them for who they are. And I wonder if there's a wonderful story. I think I can remember it well enough, of a nun who was very concerned she was going home for a holiday to see her family, and her family did not support her practice that she became a nun or that she was a Buddhist, but particularly that she became a nun. And she was very worried about what was going to happen when she went home, that it was going to be very contentious and difficult. She didn't know what to do. She went to Ajahn Sumedho and she said, what can I do when I go home? I don't know what should I do? And what he said was, don't create your parents. The kindest thing you can do to them is not to create them. I think he said it better than that, but hopefully you got the point. That the thing is that we create people. We think, well, I know who you are. And when you say this, I know why you said it and where it's coming from and what you're going to say next. And it's not true. And it's just as it's untrue about other people, is untrue about ourselves. And instead, we are a process. We are not a self. We are a constantly changing process. And that gives us freedom. And it gives other people freedom when we are willing to acknowledge that they also are a constantly changing process.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add a quote from Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, a wonderful teacher who really started to popularize Zen in the 50s and early 60s. And he was talking about non-self. And not unlike we've been talking about it today. And somebody said, Roshi, how much non-self should I have? He said, just enough so that you don't get hit by a bus. So you have to watch traffic and, and also realize how much you're hanging onto the self as well. Because we can get lost in this idea that non-self means we have to be a certain way. And that'll all take care of itself as we let the grip on our self as a permanent, ongoing, permanent entity as we loosen that grip. And so that's my 2 cents worth, and as always, worth every penny.
So we do have 2 more questions, but we will forward those into the next batch and continue to send them if they arrive.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to be sitting for